Thanks, Mr. Mortiboy, and hello to one and all, and good morning. It's a really pleasure to be here. I'm very fortunate to be the director of our Institute for Leader Development. I sit above a team, a very flat team of about 9 at the moment, but normally 10, that are really delivering on something that we believe is a key agent for change within the New Zealand Defence Force. And I'm just going to run through a little bit of our experiences. The first thing that I wanted to start with is the why. One of the things that we do with people that attend courses at the Institute is we ask them to imagine the very best leader they possibly can. And we ask them to think about that leader and think about some of the traits that that leader might display. And to write those traits down on green post-it notes, one trait per post-it note. And we might see things like benevolence and trust, communications, stability, even subject matter expertise are the types of things that people write down on those green post-it notes. And then we ask them to imagine the weak leader and to think about all the traits that that person displays in their memory and write those traits down, one trait per post on a red post-it note. We see things like double standards, impersonal, unpredictable, disinterested, micromanaging, those types of things get written down. And then we invite people to put those comments into a model. And this model is called the domain model. It's given to us by a gentleman called Hogan and Warren Feltz. And they're asked to place those post-it notes under one of 4 headings. There's the intrapersonal heading, which is who they are. The interpersonal heading, how they interact. There's the idea of building teams, and then technical skills. And the first thing that we notice from this is that the vast majority of post-it notes go into the intrapersonal. And so for our people, what they perceive as good leadership and poor leadership, or challenging leadership, fundamentally comes down to an individual's intrapersonal ability. And this is true for all ranks. It doesn't matter at what level of our organisation we do it. It doesn't matter at what level or what service we do it. We've also done it with all of government. And we've done it internationally. We've taken this to Papua New Guinea. And our Papua New Guinea comrades have done the same process and come out with the same results. And the other thing to notice about this model is that the intrapersonal is what we would call a hard end of the spectrum. Research suggests that this is the part that's sort of hardwired or wired into you early on, in the first sort of 3 years of your life. It happens in your formative years, and it's difficult to influence and change. Whereas the easier end of the spectrum are the technical skills. We can send a soldier, sailor or airman on a recruit course or a course to learn to be a mechanic, or we can send you to Command and Staff College or on an MBA program, and you can develop some of the technical skills. But it actually doesn't necessarily do anything to help deliver your understanding of yourself around the intrapersonal, who you are, and the interpersonal, how other people perceive you or how you interact. And so that's why we do a significant amount of strategic self-awareness within the Institute of Leadership Development. Our aim is to make our leaders more self-aware, to be aware of the challenges and their strengths. We try to use the word challenges rather than weaknesses because that's something that can be worked on. But we're also conscious of the idea that sometimes a weakness can be a strength overplayed. So we tend to know what our strengths are and we do it too much, and it actually portrays to our subordinates and those that we lead as a weakness. Or something that we might even use as strength in the wrong context. And what we're doing with strategic self-awareness isn't about performing heart surgery on our leaders. We're not seeing leaders come into the leadership development framework and the leadership development system fundamentally flawed in their leadership styles. But what we're talking about is a conscious attempt to just change the dial. And we use a language around fine-tuning their leadership settings so that individuals can bring their very best self to work. And we find through strategic self-awareness that generally we manage ourselves at work. You come to work and you've got your work face on, and you manage yourself. Where sometimes we mismanage is actually when we're at home, when we relax, and we're around our families, and we're not necessarily, some of our challenging traits can come out. But they also come out at work, and we're trying to influence that. And so the other reason why we want to do this is the concept of the win for the red team. What we want to do is reduce instances of poor leadership. Wherever poor leadership occurs, it can undermine a team's goals, it can undermine team cohesion and team power. And actually that's the goal of our enemies. That's what our foes are trying to do to us. And so every instance of poor leadership is effectively doing their job for them. That's what we're trying to influence. So Major General Rhys Jones in 2011 chose to establish the Institute for Leader Development. This was a joint approach. The individual services had their own leadership schools, and he wanted to bring it to the whole organisation in a coordinated way. And through that, through making leadership the centre of gravity, is probably nothing new, we delivered on a leadership development system and a leadership development framework, and I'll attempt to explain some of that to you shortly. As I said, the first thing we look at is strategic self-awareness. We use a series of tools to help understand individuals and help them understand who they are. Particular tools from the Hogan's inventory. We've focused it very heavily on the tools that the Hogan's system brings. And so we use Hogan's reports, we use 360-degree reports, and at some of our foundation levels of our training, we use what's called the NEO reports, personality inventory. And these are tools that we use to explore the idea of identity and reputation. And we tie those into the New Zealand Defence Force's leadership framework. Within our leadership framework, there are 6 key elements, and those 6 key elements, which are those 6 medallions you'll see in front of you, are supported by 27 essential tasks. And those 27 essential tasks are applicable throughout your career, whether you are a young soldier, sailor or airman entering the organisation on your first day, or if you're a brigadier looking to transition to very senior leadership roles, they're relevant. One of these key elements is the idea about thinking smart. And if you forgive me for a minute, I'm just going to read from the Thinking Smart handout to give you an idea of what that might suggest. Many leaders are self-taught and believe their promotion has come about by being technically competent. This thinking means they often try to set an example, setting the pace for their teams and doing team tasks better than anyone else. This shows that the leader hasn't yet learned that their real task is to add value to the team by doing work different to them. That is the nature of thinking smarter. Leaders add value through thinking ahead, by being creative and prepared to experiment, and by considering the consequences of their and their team's actions through time and across other units. Leaders must deal with complexity in order to provide clarity for their team. And the idea of dealing with complexity is one of the 27 key elements that supports, actually the 5 of the 27 key elements that support the idea of thinking smart. And I might just drill into dealing with complexity. Dealing with complexity has different connotations, whether you're a brigadier, whether you're a flight sergeant, whether you're a captain or an able seaman. And so in order to cut through and make it relevant within the 27 essential tasks for all our people at all different levels, we have 554 behaviour statements that support these 27 elements. The leadership framework outlines at every level the differing behaviour expectations. However, it occurs within a common framework. So when we run a course for people that are joining the organisation and when they're forming their norms of what the organisation requires, how we ask them to deal with complexity is going to be quite different to how we ask a lieutenant colonel, wing commander or a commander to deal with complexity. And we also include within that development the idea about value adds. So once we've established strategic self-awareness, we weave these value adds into each level of the framework. The idea about leading teams is is where we weave in value adds for our junior NCOs. The value adds for the warrant officers and majors occur in around the lead systems level. And these value adds are layered over the strategic self-awareness with across a series of days while they're on course to allow individuals to develop a plan to address their strengths and challenges. So we acknowledge that in some cases, setting the tone might be a strength of an individual, so we won't ask them really to dive deeply into that within their plans. But they may consider amongst their own strategic self-awareness that they're challenged around getting things done through others, and they might work on that as a key element of their leader development. We also consider the idea of 10, 20, 70. All individuals, when they come on course, are requested to have coaching conversations pre-course, and they're invited to share that plan or their leadership development plan with their immediate managers post-course. We're trying to get them to commence coaching conversations that are so valuable to the leadership development system working. And considering the 10, 20, 70 model, our expectation is that 10% of their learning will occur on course. We'll expose them to a bit of strategic self-awareness and the value adds that they need to think about at their level. 20% is actually a coaching conversation that they'll have and input from their manager. And that 70% of the learning is by doing. Creating the expectation that managers at all levels will create a climate of leadership that does not unnecessarily punish trial and error and provides room and guidance to grow. So this is what the leadership levels look like within our framework. The leadership development framework consists of 7 levels. The foundation tiers of lead self, lead teams and lead leaders are delivered by our service leadership schools through recruit courses, commissioning courses and on promotion courses. The lead systems and above, we deliver those bespoke courses through the Institute of Leadership Development. And you'll see at the levels that there's broad alignment with rank and responsibility. You'll also see that it's inclusive of our defence civilians. So we've recognised within the New Zealand Defence Force that the civilian component is as important to the idea of power and combat power as the armed component. And so we're taking steps to deliver leadership development for our civilian staff. A little more challenging for civilians that join the organisation because they don't do a recruit training course. So we can't inject lead self at that level. However, we are setting up programs now where we can, part of an induction into the organisation is that they'll do a lead self course. And so this is the leadership levels represented as the system. Within, on the slide, you'll see there's the idea of orientation, build and advance. As leaders orient to their new level, we strive to conduct a course. So in yellow are where the courses will occur. Most courses 1 to 2 weeks long. And that's part of an effective transition, is aligning their expectations with the organisation's expectations. At this level, when people are just starting out their journeys at the new levels of leadership, there's a strong requirement for coaching from managers. As people move through their build and advance phases at each leadership level, coaching can reduce as an individual hits their straps. However, that coaching then has to ramp up again as leaders get to the end of their journey, potentially at their current level, and look to move to the next level. Further, within the leadership development system, we're now looking to conduct leadership development in a vertical manner. And this looks like an operational focus around pre-deployment training. New Zealand Defence Force, particularly the land forces, we have some history of forming ad hoc teams for deployment. Intervention at early stages of teams as they're forming has enabled new command teams to rapidly align to altered dynamics and potentially areas for team breakdown. And this is the idea of preventing a win for the red team. And we've had feedback from both New Zealand Defence Force and ADF leaders, Australian Defence Force leaders who have been involved in this process has been overwhelmingly positive. Further, we have seen some success with our leadership framework within the New Zealand all-of-government context. And in 2017, we've signed up to 48 members of the all-of-government, from all-of-government to be trained on New Zealand Defence Force programs. That's important because it enriches our own development, and it addresses that idea yesterday of closing gaps of alignment, coordination and cooperation across levels of government. Further, there's an international stream of work, an ongoing stream to support the Papua New Guinea Defence Force as they develop their own leadership framework, and they're looking to lean quite heavily on what we're doing here in New Zealand and some of our lessons learned. Finally, it's inevitable that someone asks me, how do you measure the success of the system? We are currently doing level 1 evaluations immediately post-course, and people come off these courses on a high because once they get over that strategic self-awareness and maybe shining a light on some of the dark places of personality, and people come to grips with a plan to move forward, they generally come out on a high at the end of courses. So it's of limited value, I think, those level 1 evaluations, because we know 95% of you are going to be happy. Level 3 evaluations, where we actually measure learning transfer are occurring so that we can actually say what behaviour changes are occurring in the workplace, and we're seeing positive influence there. There's a plan ahead for 360-degree evaluations of senior staff. However, those 360s occur now, but we'll follow up with more 360s in a year's time to see if there's been a behaviour change on individual 360s. Now, that's a bit challenging because there's some fatigue that gets induced, particularly with our senior leaders, around hitting them up for these sorts of things. And then I think most importantly, and I'll leave you with, is the idea of anecdotal evidence. We've got evidence, petty officers who have done our course. We had one on a ship up in Devonport who was using the tool that they'd learned on the course to create their own action learning group on the ship and do some leader development of their own with their team, subordinates and some of the staff above them to actually improve performance on the ship. We're also seeing what we're calling the pull through the tunnel. And for those that know Devonport Naval Yard, the operational fleet's on the south side of the yard. There's a tunnel through a hill, and on the north side of the yard is the training fleet. And we're seeing the operational fleet reach through to the leadership development group and say, can you come and do some vertical development, take some of these tools that we've learned on course and help us actually drive the ship and make some real changes on board the ship. And that's real positive, and that's being driven from inside the organisation. So for us, it's showing that our system is starting to work. And I'll leave that there. Thank you very much.